Now that we can set up our browsers with prefixes necessary for multiple browsers and the HTML5 shiv code for our Explorer browsers, we're ready to take a look at some of the other CSS3 new features we can try. The next thing I want to look at is backgrounds. So let's go back to our working files folder, and I'm going to open up the try backgrounds file. I'll put it in our browser tab, and again, I'll open it up inside of our text edit application so we can start working on it. And as before, we've got a pretty simple document. I can look down here in the code and see that we've got two divs underneath our title. And up in our styles, we've got a generic div style that's going to set up our divs with a width, height, and a margin. And then I've got two special styles that apply background colors. And of course, we're not seeing the second one because I've got display none set on the style for right now. So we'll be working with the red square first. Now, the first thing we want to see that's new about CSS3 isn't actually the background itself, it's the way we define colors. And this works for backgrounds and anywhere else in the program where we're going to be using colors in our CSS styles. In earlier versions of CSS, we had two ways to define colors. We had a predefined set of color names that we could use, and that covers your basic colors like red, blue, green, black, and white. And then we have a definition that uses a hexadecimal. For instance, I could rewrite this color using hexadecimal notation by starting off with a £, and then adding our red, green, and blue components using hexadecimal numbers. If this color is supposed to be red, I would add FF as the highest number for all red, and then zeros for both green and blue components. And if I save those changes, I wouldn't expect to see any kind of difference on my page when it's refreshed, because we're still defining the same color as red. Now that's not too bad. It does give us a way to define colors and set them up inside the page, but it's sometimes a little bit difficult getting the hexadecimal versions of the colors. For instance, if I was working with a designer, they might provide me colors, and typically they'd provide me colors using a more normal print format, like an RGB or an HSL. Well, in CSS3, we can actually define our colors using those two color formats instead of the previous two that we were using before. Let's try it out. Since our color is already red, I'm going to change it to green. So let's go into our background color, and I'm going to use the new RGB color designation. We just started off with RGB, and then we have a set of parentheses, and there we can define the color components. If I want this to be a green, our RGB values are generally a value between 0 and 255. So I would enter 0 for the red component, a comma, then I'm going to enter the green component, which should be maximum, so that would be 255. And then I'd follow that with the blue component, which I'll add a 0 for. Now you can see those numbers are a lot easier to read, and we're probably more used to them if you're using a program like Photoshop all the time. Let me finish off my style. I'll save my change, and let's go back out and take a look at our document. You can see when I refresh it, I get a bright green now instead because that's the RGB color I've specified. Now let me show you how the RGB color can work in practice. First I need a color mixer, and I happen to have one installed as a plugin in my Firefox browser up here at the top. This one's made by a group called Colorzilla, and you can find it yourself at colorzilla.com. It has all kinds of ways for me to extract colors from web pages, but it also just has a normal color picker up here at the top. Using this, I can pick out the color I want. I think I want to go for kind of an olivey green there. And I'll just pick out something in the range here that's nice and bright. And there's my green color. Now, that's not quite as bright as the original green we had here, and I can see easily in the components that it has an RGB value of 126, 232, and 39. Now, it just so happens that this Colorzilla color picker also includes a hex value. So I can actually use any of these numbers that I want to. But I'm going to try out the RGB values since I've got them here. So we've got 126, 232, and 39. Now, normally I'd have to remember that, but this particular color picker also happens to give me the CSS values for RGB, or I could even use an HSL method if I want to. I'll just select the RGB values and copy them, and then we'll go back to our document, and I'll just paste those on in. Now, if I save those new values, and of course I'll close up my color picker, I can go back over to my page and refresh, and now I see my green shade that's not quite as bright that I picked out with the color picker. Now, having new ways to write our colors is nice, but we also get one extra bonus feature when we're working with the new color formats, and that is the ability to set an alpha. Now, let's try this out using the bottom div here. First thing I'll do is I'll get rid of the display none so that we're actually going to see this second div here at the bottom. And right now it's colored blue, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to use the RGB color method to specify the blue instead of using the color name. So we'll just type RGB like before, use parentheses, and we'll add in a typical blue color. I'll stick with an easy blue. We'll add 0 for red, 0 for green, and 255 for blue. Now if I save my document and we go out and refresh, I should see a blue square show up down here at the bottom. There's nothing new about that, but let's try to use the alpha. The first thing I need to do is change RGB to RGBA. And here, as the name implies, I'm going to be specifying 4 values, one for each one of the color components, and then an additional value that specifies the opacity of the element. Now the opacity is going to be a number between 0 and 1. So if I want this to be half opaque, I would add in 0.5. And now we've not only defined a color blue, but we've defined a transparency setting for that color blue as well. Now let me save these changes. And when we go back out and refresh our document, you can see that we have a much lighter blue here because of the transparency. But let me add something else. I'll go over to this bottom div, and the first thing I'll do is set a position for it of absolute, and that way we can move it around on the page. And just so we know where it's going to be, I'll set the top position to be 0, so it'll be up at the top of our document. And then I'll set the left position at, let's say, 100 pixels, so it'll be over near the left edge of the browser window. Now let's save our changes once again and go and refresh our page. Now you can see that the blue div has been pushed up to the top of our document. Of course, it still has a margin, so it's pushed down a little bit. And here we can definitely see the transparency. I can see the text and the green color through it, and you can see that in this area, the two colors are actually mixing. So we can get some really neat effects by using these alpha colors wherever we need them.